program this Sunday consists of two composers. In the first half, we're going to encounter Schubert. The first piece on the program is called simply Three Pieces. This is probably not what Schubert intended, probably not quite what they are. And the explanation goes like this. In the year prior to his last, in other words, at the age of 30, Schubert wrote two sets of impromptus. He called them impromptus, and each of these sets consisted of 4 pieces for the piano. Sometimes people like to think of them as sonatas in 4 movements, but that's quite contrary to the idea of an impromptu. An impromptu is written precisely to match what the word means, and that is something which is made up, something which is improvisatory, and certainly not the structure and the rigor of the structure that Schubert would have associated with a sonata. So in essence, these two sets were 4 pieces, individual, each one a piece being able to stand on its own, and then set as a group as a group of 4. The next year, which would turn out to be the last year of his life at the age of 31, Schubert wrote many pieces. Of course, he wrote many pieces each year, an astonishing number. And in this last year, he produced some of his greatest pieces, but he also wrote another 3 pieces for the piano. These 3 pieces were found much later. They were published decades after his death, strangely enough, by Brahms. Brahms found these pieces, put them together, and the mystery about them is whether or not he was going to write a 4th of these and call them another set of impromptus, or whether this was simply 3 pieces randomly written for the piano, which he then forgot about or left and went to other pieces. In any case, they are quite similar to the other 2 sets. The beauty of these 3 pieces is that they don't adhere to a strict structural emphasis in the way that a sonata would, but that they are really improvisatory and lead to corners in Schubert's world that we otherwise would not get to. Following this, we go back a little bit, about 10 years, to an earlier time, and Schubert's duo for piano and violin. He had written previously what he called sonatas, but we tend to think of them more as sonatinas. In other words, a little bit lighter and a little bit shorter than a real heavy sonata. He had written 3 of those, and he now turned to what really was his largest piece for violin and piano, and he called it a duo. It's in 4 movements and really exhibits Schubert's most melodic, most singing, most beautiful and serene music. The piano and the violin are pretty much equal partners. And even though he played the violin, that was his first instrument, he never wrote for it in a truly virtuosic manner, but used it more to serve the music that emanated from his heart so beautifully. The second half of our program features a sextet by Erich Wolfgang Korngold. Korngold was one of those unimaginable prodigies where one really gets to the point of seeing music altogether as something which is so innately part of our humanity that one can actually be born knowing it. And like Mozart, like Mendelssohn, Korngold displayed an unbelievable ability to compose and to understand and emanate music at an astonishingly early age. He played a cantata he had written for Mahler when he was 10 years old, and he came to the attention of Strauss when he was 11 or 12. And when the idea came up that he should study at the Vienna Conservatory, which is what one normally would do, both Mahler and Strauss and Puccini, for that matter, said that that would be completely useless because he couldn't learn anything there. He went on to be one of the more successful and famous composers of that time being the 1920s and 30s in Germany and Austria. Around the early 30s, 34, I believe, he was asked to come to Hollywood to write a film score. This was because the music that he was writing seemed to producers, to big producers, to be exactly the kind of background for the lavish, extravagant films that were being made at that time. In those years, the film industry in Hollywood was run by major film studios. Each of these studios had an entire symphony orchestra at its disposal. And in fact, those orchestras used the best musicians available because the pay was better than playing, for instance, in the Los Angeles Philharmonic. So Korngold went to Hollywood, started, in fact, he was the first ever composer to be under contract to a film studio, and he began writing film scores. He went back and forth between Austria and Hollywood, and eventually, when the war became evident, and in fact his house was confiscated in Austria, he emigrated entirely and was living in Hollywood for the rest of his life. The actual situation of film composers versus so-called serious composers became a real issue in the case of Korngold. We have always tended to see film composers as having somewhat sold out, and in order to make a good living, succumbing to the commercialism of writing for Hollywood films. In the case of Korngold, it's really a little bit of a chicken and an egg question. Did his music appeal to Hollywood and therefore become the kind of music that one associates with films? Or did he begin writing music that associates with films? In his case, it's very clear that the kind of romanticism, the lushness, the emotionality of the music that he was writing simply lent itself to these huge, extravagant film scores. Now, many, many years after his death, we have come around to going back to his so-called serious music, and it is obviously of a quality that's equal to any. And in this case, we have a string sextet, which for my purposes in the program changes entirely the sound that is coming from the stage. The piano is gone, the single violin is gone, and we have, in essence, a pretty large chamber group. Writing for string sextet is a very complex endeavor because, in essence, you have 3 string sections. You have the violins, the violas, and the celli, and this lends itself to different sorts of texture. You can create a texture which is fairly symphonic if you use all the instruments together. And at the same time, you can separate them into smaller groups and even individual players. And what Korngold does in this piece is a combination of both. It's highly emotional, it's highly romantic. It's, I would say, almost the exact opposite of the clarity and pristine sound of Schubert that we had in the first half, and makes for a magnificent and exhilarating finale to this concert.